Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. For those of you maybe new to applied behavior analysis, or even if you've been around it a while, you might have questions, maybe even some hesitations about how it's used.
That's completely understandable. ABA is, well, it's a powerful way to understand behavior, but it's so important it's applied responsibly, ethically.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. Chapter 2 of Applied Behavior Analysis for Teachers. It really gets into the nitty-gritty of using ABA procedures the right way.
Think of this as breaking down the key ideas for you. Simple language, real examples.
Right. We want you to feel confident using these tools. So our goal here is to pull out the most important bits from the chapter, tackle some common concerns, and give you practical takeaways for your work.
Especially for you, our listeners, we know you're eager to learn and apply this stuff. We want to make these concepts super clear, relevant to your day-to-day, without all the dense jargon.
Okay, so let's jump in. First off, some things that make people a bit uneasy about ABA. That term behavior modification carries some baggage, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. Historically, it was kind of a catch-all phrase, and unfortunately, it got mixed up with things totally unrelated to ABA. Things like hypnosis, even psychosurgery. Really controversial stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see how that would cause confusion and fear, really.
Absolutely. So the crucial thing to get is that ABA is different. It's grounded in science, in the experimental analysis of behavior, understanding how the environment shapes what we do.
Got it. So science-based learning principles, not those other things. Okay. What about the idea that trying to change behavior systematically is somehow, coercive or disrespectful of free will?
That's a really thoughtful point. It often comes from more, let's say, humanistic viewpoint, emphasizing free will as the primary driver. ABA takes a slightly different perspective, a deterministic one.
Deterministic, meaning?
Meaning that behavior is seen as lawful, influenced by our environment and our learning history. But, and this is important, it doesn't mean we don't have freedom. In ABA, freedom often means having more options, more skills.
Ah, okay. So by teaching skills, you're actually increasing their freedom because they have more choices.
Precisely. It's about expanding possibilities.
That's a helpful way to look at it. Now, here's an odd one the chapter mentions. Sometimes people worry because ABA is effective. It seems counterintuitive.
It does sound strange, right? But sometimes less effective methods might seem easier, less demanding. ABA often requires more planning, more consistency.
More work, basically.
Yeah, often more systematic work. But its effectiveness is why we use it. It's like taking the well-mapped trail instead of attempting shortcut that might go nowhere.
Makes sense. The chapter also notes that behaviorism itself, the broader field ABA grew out of, has faced its share of criticism, and ABA kind of got caught in that sometimes.
Exactly. There had been various pushbacks. Some felt it contradicted certain developmental theories. Others saw it as too much effort, maybe even threatening existing ways of doing things, or questioning the role of reinforcement.
Like the example of direct instruction for reading. Very systematic, very behavioral.
Right. It works very well, but it definitely demands more structure and consistency from the teacher than, say, just hoping kids absorb reading skills.
And that historical baggage you mentioned with behavior modification, it sticks around. That anecdote about someone asking, are you going to shock me?
Yikes. It really highlights the misconceptions, which is so ironic, as you mentioned.
Yeah, because B.F. Skinner was strongly against punishment. He advocated for positive reinforcement.
Hugely. It underscores how careful we need to be with language. Like the timeout example, calling the space boxes or saying putting him in the box created a problem, even if the procedure itself wasn't inherently bad. The label mattered.
That leads perfectly into Carr's suggestion from the chapter, using ethical language. Words like compassion, dignity, honesty when talking about what we do.
Yes, rather than just the technical terms. It makes the human element much clearer, focuses on our values.
And helps counter that other common worry, that using reinforcement somehow kills intrinsic motivation.
Right. The chapter points to research by Cameron and Pierce showing that actually reinforcement, when used correctly, often increases enjoyment and motivation.
Good to know. But it's fair to say there's still, understandably, more public concern about using anything aversive or exclusionary.
Oh, absolutely. And rightly so. There's potential for misuse, and the ethical considerations are significant. That requires extra care.
Okay, so we've acknowledged some of the background concerns. Let's pivot to the core of ethical practice itself. What does doing the right thing really mean in ABA?
Well, it's more than just ticking boxes on a guideline sheet, though those are important. We have ethical codes from groups like the Council for Exceptional Children and especially the BACB, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board.
But the chapter says it's not just about reading the code, right?
No, not at all. True ethical reasoning develops through discussion, wrestling with dilemmas with colleagues, making it part of continuous learning.
And acting ethically isn't just nice to do. It protects our ability to use these effective strategies.
Exactly. If the public or oversight bodies don't trust us to be ethical, they might impose restrictions that limit our effectiveness.
So when deciding if an intervention is ethical, what factors come into play?
Several key things. Community standards, what's generally acceptable, laws, obviously, prevailing philosophies about treatment, and crucially, individual freedom and responsibility, which connects strongly to informed consent.
Informed consent. We'll come back to that. What else?
And, very importantly, the client's attitudes and feelings. How do they experience the intervention?
That sounds like Wolf's idea of social validity.
Precisely. Are the goals we're targeting important to the individual and their family? Are the procedures acceptable? Do they like the outcomes?
How do you figure that out?
Through talking to people, questionnaires, interviews, surveys with parents, teachers, sometimes the students themselves. Even if the questions aren't perfect, asking is better than assuming. It flags concerns.
And social validity connects to procedural integrity, making sure the plan is followed correctly.
Yes, there's a really interesting link. Good training leads to better implementation, higher procedural integrity, which often makes the procedures seem more acceptable, higher social validity, and vice versa. If people find it acceptable, they're more likely to do it right.
Huh. They feed into each other. And we absolutely have to consider cultural diversity in all this.
Absolutely critical. What's considered an appropriate goal or procedure can vary hugely. Sensitivity is key.
The chapter then points to specific sections in the BACB Code relevant for teachers.
Right. Things like responsible conduct, responsibility to clients, how we assess behavior, develop change programs, and even our responsibility to colleagues.
And it mentions those 6 individual rights from the Association for Behavior Analysis back in '88. Those seem foundational.
They are. The right to a therapeutic environment, services focused on personal welfare, treatment by a competent behavior analyst.
Let's pause on that one competent behavior analyst. What does that really involve?
It involves a lot. Becoming a board-certified behavior analyst, a BCBA, means advanced degrees, specific coursework, hundreds, even thousands of hours of supervised practice, passing a tough exam.
So it's not something you pick up in a weekend workshop?
Definitely not. The chapter stresses this. Basic principles might seem simple, but applying them effectively, especially for complex issues like, say, severe self-injury or a complex skill acquisition, requires deep knowledge and practice.
That reminds me of the anecdote about the faculty member wanting a quick handout to replace a whole behavior management course.
Exactly. Or the example of someone just handing out candy randomly and calling it reinforcement. It shows a lack of understanding that can make things worse, not better.
So real competence comes from thorough training, often including things like behavioral skills, training instructions, modeling, practice, feedback.
Yes, competency-based training is key. Okay, another core ethical piece. Responsibility to clients and getting consent.
What's central there?
Identifying who the primary client is, usually the student. Maintaining open communication with parents, other professionals. Being clear about your role. Protecting confidentiality is huge.
And getting specific permission for things like recording sessions.
Absolutely. And consent for the actual treatment plan. Clients have a right to effective research-based treatment.
Which links to the goal being personal welfare, making sure the intervention actually benefits the student.
Right. The chapter mentions that historical concern about programs just aiming for quiet, compliant students, be still, be quiet, be docile, for institutional convenience.
We've hopefully moved past that mostly, but it's a good reminder.
It is. We need to constantly ask, is this skill going to improve this person's quality of life? Help them function better? This often involves balancing readiness skills, functional skills, academic skills, aligned with curriculum standards too.
And the student or parents need to agree with these goals.
Voluntarily agree. For students with disabilities, parental consent for behavior programs is typically a legal requirement, though not usually for general classroom management strategies everyone experiences.
And that consent has to be informed and voluntary, meaning
they fully understand the program, what it involves, potential risks, benefits, alternatives, and they agree without feeling pressured. Info might need to be in their native language. Consent might even be needed for using things like teleconsultation.
Makes sense. Ethical assessment is another big one.
You can't ethically intervene without assessing first. We need things like functional behavior assessments, FBAs, to understand why a behavior happens. Again, consent is needed for assessment.
And then you share the results understandably and use the data to guide the intervention.
Exactly. Which leads to ongoing evaluation. We need data. We can't just say, oh, I think he's doing better. We need to show it.
Graph it, track it. Use data to set goals based on observation, not just vague ideas.
Right. Goals based on observation, tests, records, input from parents, teachers, the student.
Okay, let's talk strategies and the least restrictive environment, LRE.
Interventions should be based on behavior analytic principles. Get consent. Involve students if you can, and always, always prioritize reinforcement over punishment.
But what if punishment seems necessary?
There are strict conditions. You generally need to show reinforcement-based options were tried and weren't enough, unless there's immediate danger. You need more training, more supervision, constant evaluation of effects, and a clear plan to phase it out. And always pair it with teaching what to do.
And LRE, it's more than just physical placement, right? Not just being in a general.
It's much more. It's about providing necessary supports while minimizing restrictions on freedom, movement, access to preferred activities, social interactions. It's complex. Full inclusion requires careful planning to ensure the environment is truly safe and supportive.
Safe meaning physically safe, but also protected from things like bullying.
Yes, and humane. Treating individuals with dignity, respecting them, offering choices, age-appropriate activities, being sensitive to their needs.
And a big part of that humane approach is teaching functional skills.
Absolutely. Education should equip students for life. Skills that help them participate in their community. Learning algebra might be functional for one student's path. Learning household chores might be crucial for another's contribution at home. It depends on their environment.
Even students with significant disabilities can learn functional academic and pre-academic skills.
Definitely. And when we work on reducing challenging behavior, we must also teach constructive alternative skills. Often reinforcing the positive skill helps decrease the inappropriate one anyway.
What about really severe behaviors?
Sometimes you might need to focus on reducing the severe behavior first, often using functional analysis to understand its purpose, then systematically teach and reinforce a functional replacement skill.
Okay, last right. The right to the most effective treatment available.
This means moving beyond just custodial care. ABA has decades of research showing its effectiveness. We have an ethical obligation to use procedures demonstrated to work for similar issues in students.
Staying current with research is part of that.
It is. Now, sometimes the most effective procedure might not be ethically or legally permissible. Think about certain restraint or seclusion practices. You follow employer guidelines, legal mandates, and always prioritize positive approaches first. But the point is, placement alone isn't enough. We need effective teaching.
And finally, a quick mention of responsibility to colleagues.
Promoting an ethical culture, holding each other accountable. We often work in teams, IEP teams, for example. We need to model ethical behavior and address concerns if we see them.
Got it. So shifting slightly, the chapter talks about accountability. How does that fit in?
Accountability in ABA is really about transparency, publishing your goals, procedures, and results so they can be evaluated.
And because ABA uses observable goals, clear procedures, and data, it lends itself to this.
Exactly. It's built in. This allows everyone, parents, administrators, the public, to see if what we're doing is actually working.
The chapter frames this as a good thing for teachers, a way to demonstrate competence.
It is. It helps you verify your own effectiveness. And we're accountable to lots of people, our profession, the community, admin, parents, students, ourselves. There's a helpful table in the chapter summarizing ethical suggestions.
Assuring competence, choosing good goals, ensuring voluntary participation, being accountable. Sums it up well. Okay, last big question the chapter raises. Theory or recipes?
Yes. Is it enough to just have a cookbook of techniques?
Or do you need to understand the underlying principles, the why?
The chapter, and Professor Grundy it mentions, argue strongly for understanding the principles. Recipes might give you quick wins sometimes, but a deeper understanding lets you solve new problems, adapt to different situations, be truly competent in the long run. You need the analysis in applied behavior analysis.
Being a problem solver, not just following steps. Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive into Chapter 2. Key takeaways seem to be: understanding the concerns around ABA is important, ethical practice is multifaceted, involving competence, consent, focusing on welfare and functional skills, using assessment and data, respecting LRE principles, using effective treatments, being accountable.
And valuing the underlying theory, not just looking for quick fixes. It all comes back to using ABA responsibly to ultimately enhance personal freedom by increasing skills and options.
We really hope this discussion encourages you to think about how these principles play out in your own practice. Keep exploring these ideas.
And maybe leave you with this thought. How can deepening your grasp of ABA's core principles empower you? Empower you to navigate those tricky ethical situations and really advocate for the most effective, most humane support for your learners. Something to definitely mull over.